Welcome to the business interview. I'm Markus Karlsson. Have you ever dreamt of chucking it all in, starting your own business and becoming your own boss? Well, you can do it, and it's actually not as difficult as it may seem. That's a message, at least, from my guest today, who's joining us from London. Chris Guillebeau is the author of the book The Art of Nonconformity, and now he's coming out with another title, The $100 Startup. In it, he argues that almost all of us can become entrepreneurs. First of all, welcome to the show, Chris.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now, did I summarize your book properly there?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good. The message of the book is it's not so much about building a big company, and it's not so much about managing employees better. The message of the book is essentially about freedom. It's about how anyone can do something that they love and craft a business model around it.
That's one thing that really struck me when I read the book, that it's about freedom in your mind, not so much about making a lot of money when you're starting your own business.
Well, it's not so much about having a huge company. I mean, everyone that we talked to was able to make a good living. So it is about making money, but it is mostly about freedom. It's about, the chance to kind of go off on your own and the chance to, make your own way.
I want to talk a little bit about you as well. I mean, what's your story? You're an entrepreneur as well. What was your idea from the start? What got this all going?
Yeah, I was fortunate to spend about 4 years in West Africa. I was an aid worker. I lived in Sierra Leone and Liberia. I had a very great transformative experience out of that. And then I moved back to the US and I went to graduate school. And the whole time I was supporting myself through self-employment. I did a lot of different things. Ended up starting a career as a writer. But I had built a number of other small businesses along the way. And at each point, I always did so without spending a lot of money and without going to business school. And then I realized that there was a lot of other people out there who had done the same thing. So, in many ways, I just wanted to tell their stories and tell how readers could do the same thing.
And that's why you wanted to write this book from the start?
Well, I traveled a lot over the world. I've been on this quest to visit every country. And when my first book came out, I went all across North America, and I kept hearing fun stories of people like me who had started a business without business school, no MBA, without going to the bank to beg for money or without begging their family for money. And I wanted to tell their stories because I feel like there's a lot of opportunity these days for people to do that. So I wanted to tell the stories and then also hopefully provide a path, for other people to do the same thing.
All right. You said that you wanted to tell some stories, but tell us as well what your tips are to budding entrepreneurs who may be watching. What are your top 3 tips to people who want to start their own business?
Great. Top 3 tips. I would say, first of all, lots of people have general ideas about running a business, or they have like this vague idea, and the sooner you can kind of go from a general idea to a specific idea, the better. So every business idea includes an offer. It includes, the product or service that you're putting out, as well as, what price you're going to offer it and to whom you're going to offer it. So once you can begin focusing, from the general to the specific, that's better. The second thing is to focus on the question of income and focus on, how will this business actually make money, as opposed to thinking about how much, how am I going to be able to raise the money to start the business, because almost everyone I talked to, spent very little money doing it. They all spent less than $1,000, many of them less than $100 US. And then the third thing I would say is, as soon as possible, get that idea out there. Don't spend a year developing something if you don't know if it's going to be successful or not. Don't spend a lot of money, first of all, and then don't spend a lot of time. So get that idea out there within 30 days and then see what happens, and then you can respond to that.
So basically the message is get your product out there, and if at first you don't succeed, try again.
Yes, and also, keep risk low. If you're not investing a lot of money, then there's not much risk, and so the cost of failure is much lower, and so you can try multiple things until you succeed, and lots of people I talked with did that.
Now, a lot of people are probably hearing what you're saying, and they would love to start their own business, but at this point it seems quite harsh. It seems like a tough job. Seeing, for instance, here in the Eurozone, it's a pretty gloomy picture when it comes to the economy. What do you say to those who are doubting at this stage when they look at the general state of play?
I would say that there's never been a better opportunity to start a business, especially a micro business. So, when you mention the economy, you're talking about the macro economy and all of these unemployment statistics, and it is quite gloomy, when you look at the big picture. But historically, a lot of businesses have been started during recessions, and also whenever there's a recession or, a negative economic outlook, a lot of us start thinking differently about opportunity, and we start thinking differently about security. And a lot of the people that I talked with, and myself as well, we find more security through our own creative self-employment than in competing in the job market. So I would say whenever there's a recession or a negative, gloomy outlook, there's also a lot of opportunities out there for, micro business owners to succeed.
In your book, you outline quite a lot of examples as well of what you call accidental entrepreneurs. Which is the most bizarre example of a business idea that you've encountered while writing your book?
The most bizarre example, I'll think about that. I guess most of the examples were quite ordinary. Most of the examples were people who were just regular people. They hadn't been trained in business. They had their own training. They were doing their own jobs. But in many cases, there was a shock or a transition. Some of them lost their jobs, and they ended up starting a business out of that. So a negative, became a positive. There was a former journalist here in England who started her own photography course, and she ended up making more money, doing that than she had as a journalist. But when I think of bizarre stories, I also think of people who kind of found a way to provide a service that people can do for themselves for free, but they were able to create a business out of it. So there was one guy in Virginia in the United States who started a successful business helping people use their frequent flyer miles to book award tickets around the world. And he started this as a side business, and it now brings in more than $100,000 a year. So he still has his day job, but he has this side business, producing a very, very good income as well.
I read that story and I was amazed when I looked at it and when I heard about it. It's all about finding that service that no one else has thought about before.
It's essentially about finding something that's useful and helpful to people. It's not about creating something that's never been there before necessarily. I mean, sometimes it's just about giving people what they want, about figuring out what people really want, and then finding a way to provide that. So a lot of the people that I talked with, they had really kind of focused on something that they were good at or something that they were personally interested in, their own hobby or skill, but then they found a way to take that further and connect that to something that was desired by other people as well.
It almost seems as if your book is an indictment on business schools that cost a lot of money. Don't we need these very expensive business schools that teach people how to manage, for instance, and how to run a business?
I guess it depends on your goal. The problem is that most business schools don't actually teach people how to start a business. Most business schools, which are based on the U.S. model, they teach people how to become mid-level executives in big, global companies. And that's fine, but all the people that I'm talking about, and what the $100 startup model is really about, is about that question of freedom that we started with. It's that question of doing something that you love and crafting a lifestyle business around it. So business schools may be needed for something, but they certainly aren't needed for that.
Also, is your book an indictment on banks? You say that a lot of ideas, they don't really need that startup capital. There's a lot of focus, for instance, now during the Eurozone debt crisis here in Europe, that it's difficult for ordinary people and for entrepreneurs to get their holds or to get their hands on credit from banks. You're saying that actually you may not need the banks.
Exactly. I don't know if it's an indictment on banks. Maybe it's an indictment on the idea that to run a business, one of your first steps is to put together this 60-page business plan that no one's ever going to read, and then you're going to take that business plan to a bank, and then you're going to wait, months and months on the result, and your entire success is dependent on them. So it is an indictment of that whole model, and it's an alternative that says, forget about that. Just think about the skills you already have. Think about the money you already have. Don't spend a lot of money. Don't go into debt. Just go and start something. And so I think of it more as a positive alternative than an indictment of something else.
Going back to the title, though, the $100 startup, aren't you looking at this through rose-tinted glasses? Some people will probably say that. I mean, how many people can actually start a business with just $100?
When we began the whole study for this, we cast a very wide net. We went out all over the world and we said we want to hear from people from all different backgrounds. We want it to be very international and very diverse, and your business has to be successful. You have to make a certain income, like at least a good income. You have to be very specific in sharing your financial information with us because we want to provide something very specific. You have to operate the business with fewer than 5 employees. You have to do it with with the skills you already have. So we had these very specific characteristics, but we heard from more than 1,500 people who all shared detailed case studies of how they had done it from all walks of life, people of all ages, young people, older people, single parents, retired people who are looking to do something different. So I really feel like that there are a lot of people out there who are able to do this. And again, if you keep the risk low, then it doesn't matter if the first project is unsuccessful, then you can try a second project, and maybe that one will succeed.
But for every success that you described in the book, there are also a lot of failures. I mean, at the end of the day, it is quite risky to go out on a limb and to start your own company, isn't it?
I would say it's quite risky to entrust your security to someone else. I would say it's quite risky, to try to compete in a job market where there's hundreds of other people who may look, just as good as you do on paper. I would say that's the real risk. I would say in many cases it's actually the conservative, alternative to go into business for yourself. It's the conservative alternative to take responsibility for yourself. So we did look at both successes and failures, but in many cases what we saw is that a lot of the initial failures or the initial disasters kind of turned into recovery, along the way. And when that person was able to recover, then that disaster is almost like a moment of strength, because you look back on it and you're like, this was this really bad thing, but then it turned into something positive, and it gave me strength for the next thing or the next future.
All right, so it's all time for us to fire our bosses, as you were saying in your book, is it?
It's time for many of us to fire our bosses, and I think more importantly, it's time for many of us to take responsibility for making our own future instead of entrusting it to other people.
All right, thanks very much, Chris Guillebeau. I'm not really sure I'm going to fire my boss just yet. Nonetheless, I did enjoy reading your book very much. Thanks very much indeed, Chris Guillebeau, the author there of the $100 Startup. You're watching France 24. Do stay with us. We have more news coming your way soon.